So today's webinar is about my experience recently with the GMAT Classic test, the actual test, and a practice test that I took of the Focus edition 3 days ago. So today's session mainly will focus on, well, we'll look at my scores. So these are my scores quickly. I had a 760 on the actual test, which is the 99th percentile score, and then a 675 in the mock test that I took on the 8th of Feb, which is a 96th percentile score. So in just a matter of 18 days difference, and I didn't even study in between in those 18 days, I saw these two different scores. Again, I want to be clear. The classic test score is on the actual test. The 675 is a practice test. So I'll get more into this. Before I do, though, what all will be covered today? Well, I'll start off with giving you a brief background about myself. I'll ask you about you guys. I'll then share my experience preparing for the classic version recently, the practice tests, how the actual test went. I'll share my experience of the Focus edition practice test that I took recently in terms of how that compares with the old one. What are the things that I liked? What are the things that I didn't like? And what are the things that I'm still not sure about? And also, to end, I'll share what steps I intend to take now to try to improve my score in the next Focus edition practice test that I take. So first off, hello, in case we haven't met before, my name is 𝗁𝗲𝗄𝘁, although you would have, I'm sure at least, if not before, you would have seen it for this webinar. So that's me. I've been a full-time GMAT coach since 2019. I used to do it part-time for quite a while, I think about 7 years before that, 6 to 7 years. That was usually either only weekends, or then later on I started mornings, evenings, on weekdays, and plus weekends. And then in 2019, I shifted to it full-time. One of the things I'm really, really proud of and really enjoy these days, I'm a father to a 4-year-old. Right? I love the mountains. Last year, and I believe I mean, I look at it as an achievement. Last year, out of the 12 months, I spent 7 months in Himachal, not all in one go. Different spurts, the longest of which I think was about 4 months. But yeah, so really love the mountains, have spent some time in Ladakh, quite some time in Himachal, Uttarakhand. Haven't been to other parts, to the Northeast, for example, not yet. One of the things I did in Himachal last year actually was I did a pottery course, a 3-month pottery course. So I enjoyed pottery. That was really nice. And the experience with clay and being in nature, all that was really pleasurable. I really enjoyed all that. In addition to those things, though, what I hadn't thought of even before I went there, what I really enjoyed while I was there was this, I didn't want to call it newfound, so I wrote it as refound love for learning. I think it was after quite a while that I started learning something completely new for me. And just that experience of learning something new was really very exciting, right? Sure, there were ups and downs, there were frustrations, but it was very interesting also to notice how I was dealing with those ups and downs, whether I would get frustrated, how frustrated would I get, for how long would I remain frustrated. So just the experience of learning something new was really enjoyable. Once upon a time, I am a software engineer. I graduated from McMaster University back in 2003, MBA from Ahmedabad a while back also. I worked in a few startups over the years for about 5 years before I became a GMAT coach full-time. I was in the edtech space. I had started my own company, which then got acquired by another one. And then I joined them also. I was with them for about close to 3 years. In fact, it was there that I kind of realized what I really wanted to do. Because I knew I was I knew for a very long time that I was interested in education and teaching, and that too, especially test prep. That kind of falls into my niche. This is something that I have been good at myself also, right? And that I enjoy doing. So I wanted to teach, and it was this specific subject matter that interested me then, and that in which I was good at, uh, So it was making sense. But then I found myself, or rather, I realized that I had shifted more in the direction of technology than I had stayed in the direction of education. So in that ed tech, I was focused more on the tech than on the ed. In fact, my role in the company that I joined, I was the head of the the marketing and sales team there. So I was the marketing head. I wasn't teaching. I wasn't into the core education of it all at all. I was focusing just on how to sell our courses. So over a period of time, while I learned quite a few things, mostly I learned how not to market. So I learned a lot of things which don't work, which is also valuable, I believe. But yeah, apart from that, what I did realize that what I really wanted to do end of the day was teach, right? For me, it wasn't necessarily about, oh, I have to create a big ed tech startup or a big platform. It was more about I enjoy teaching. And if that can help me earn my bread and butter, then why not? So that's when back in 2009, I jumped into it full time. All right, so that's a few things about me. What I'd like for you guys to do now in the chat, because that way I think you'll just be more efficient. And although I know a few of you, I already see a few familiar names, but what I'd still like for everyone to do is tell me in the chat. Anyway, I think I'll be able to read your name. If you have an abbreviation or something, let me know your name, where you are currently, and also something non-education and career related about you. Something not related to GMAT, your work experience, your education, none of those things. So these three things, if you could tell me in the chat. I'll repeat. If you need to mention your name, do that. Where you are currently, and something non-education and career related about you. What you like to do in your free time, or it could be anything at all, really. Greater Noida, Nitin. I'm also in Greater Noida. Stand up, interesting. Hatha yoga, also interesting. Hi, Varun. Okay, but that's okay. So Varun is one of my students, I know. Right?
Hi, Anish.
Hi. But still, maybe you can repeat, Varun, even if you have told me before in the chat, huh?
Sure.
Navneet is from Hyderabad. I cannot wait to skydive. There we go. Any plans in the near future, Navneet? I notice a few of you are sharing direct messages. Please make sure you don't have that option selected and you're sending the message to everyone. Rahul currently learning to play the keyboard. Anirudh in West India, loves swimming. Aniket, Pune, food, tennis, exploring places. Any interesting place you've been to recently, Aniket? Rahul, avid runner. Mukund, Coimbatore, horse riding, love to travel. Hi, Navisha. I'm well, thank you. In your hometown, with sir, watching movies. I know that about you. Ravi's in Gurgaon. Black coffee, always, never instant. Okay. Working out at the moment, Tanvi, while this webinar is going on. Lasya. In case I'm pronouncing anyone's name incorrectly, let me know. Lasya, is that the correct pronunciation? I love seeing ideas come to life, whether it's in the form of writing, video, or designing. Hello, Aniket, food, tennis. Kunal, I've known you for a while. Love for mountains. Recently went to Tirthan. There we go. Abhishek is in Uttarakhand. All right. Ruchi, Bangalore, Salsa, Isha, Nikunj, got it, excellent. Irfan's the student currently. Love binge watching podcasts on YouTube. Podcasts on YouTube. I do that also, but kind of a, what's the word? Oxymoron, no? Podcasts are supposed to be an audio medium. But yeah, even I've seen a few podcasts on YouTube. Ooh, sorry to hear that, Abhay. 𝘁𝗙𝗽𝗲𝗃𝗃 Netflix sketching. All right. Nice. Short and sweet, and gets the job done. Thanks, Rishabh. All right. Excellent. Thank you all for sharing. See, quite a few familiar names. So I'm glad you guys could join. Sure. Let's continue. So the classic version. Let me start with my background with the classic version. I've taken it twice now. I took it once back in March 2006. That's when I was preparing or planning to do my own MBA. I'd appeared for the CAT also. I thought, let me appear for the GMAT as well as a backup option. CAT, by the way, in case you don't know, is an entrance test for MBA in India. So, and remember, between this whole time, for the last 5 years or 4 or 5 years, I've been teaching GMAT full-time and also part-time for quite a while before that, right? So, yeah, my scores in both these attempts were 760. No change at all in the final score. My quant scores remained the same. My verbal score saw a slight improvement. So let me talk about this for a minute first. In fact, let me start with when I decided to take the test. Rather, why did I decide to take the test? They were finishing the classic version. This was kind of my last chance to take it again, the classic edition. To be completely transparent and honest, at that point, the main reason in my mind was, let me take the test again and try to get a higher score this time. That was the first thing that came to my mind. That was the main thing. Let me try to get a score higher than 760, because after that, I can never change this score 760, right? I would have a 5 ending score after this, if at all I take the test again. So yeah, that was the main reason. That was the foremost reason. Let me try to get a higher score, which, by the way, didn't happen, of course. But yeah, so I anyway thought, oh, I've been a GMAT coach. Even my expectation was, I've been teaching GMAT for so long. I'm much clearer about many things now, for sure, than I was back in the day when I took the test the first time. Right? So I did expect and hope that those things would translate into a higher score. Didn't happen. Now, obviously, one conclusion can be that maybe actually my quant and verbal skills haven't improved, which is fine. I do still believe that my teaching skills anyway have improved, right? I couldn't explain things as well in 2006. Well, I believe that anyway. Might not be true, but I believe at least my teaching skills have improved. Even if my quant and verbal skills haven't. Although I don't believe that's true, and this is just me speculating. I'm not sure. I don't believe that's true. I believe that those things, or the improvement in those things, got balanced with some other things. Stamina, for example. Even the practice tests that I took this time and the actual test also, although all the classic version tests that I've taken recently, the actual and the practice ones, I did finish all of them. I didn't have any questions left in the end on any of these, I think 4 tests I took overall. I finished all of them, but I did find that I was getting quite exhausted towards the end. Quant would go fine. Verbal towards the end, I would start getting exhausted. So my comprehension would get lower. Reading comprehension or sentence correction, I stopped noticing errors, right? Or rather, it became more difficult for me to notice errors. So I did feel that was happening towards, let's say, close to the last quarter of the verbal section. Also, in addition, I think one thing that played a big part was my mindset. So let me talk about this for a minute. Back in 2006, I had taken the test. I think, I don't remember the date exactly, but I think it was 30th March or maybe 31st March. Why that date? Because ISB had a deadline. I don't remember what round it was, round one, round two, round three. I don't remember. They had some deadline for that March end, Indian School of Business. My primary focus had been on CAT till then, but I'd taken the CAT, I'd got a 98th percentile score, so I hadn't got admissions from any of the top B schools, the IMs and all that, right? So I was anyway thinking of taking it again the next year. Meanwhile, I thought, okay, let me give GMAT a shot, and then I can target schools like ISB. So I made up my mind on Saturday to take the test on the coming Thursday. Saturday was the first time, and this is all true. Saturday was the first time I decided, oh, let me try to take the GMAT. I went and bought a book. It was back in 2006. We didn't have all these online courses and everything. I went and bought a book, and it came with a CD with practice tests. So I did that for 5 days. Mainly what I did was just go through a few things in the book and take a few practice tests from that CD. I remember still on Wednesday, the day before I had my actual exam, I took a test from that Kaplan CD. I got a 570 on it. That was the lowest score I got in all the practice tests I took. Even the other ones were not that high, though. They were 600 something. But in the last test I took, the day before my actual exam, I got a 570. I was pretty disappointed, right? Pretty heartbroken. I'd already kind of decided that, oh, my test tomorrow is going to be not a good experience. I'm not going to get a score that I'll be pleased with. I decided already. My mother was also like, that's fine, no problem. But also, I mean, she added, well, now you understand that you should have started preparing earlier, right? And I was already frustrated. I didn't want to hear that. But yeah, she was right? I shouldn't have left it till the last 5 days. Anyway, so then I went into the exam with the mindset of nothing to lose. My mindset was, man, I'm just taking the test because anyway, I've already spent the money. Who cares? Yeah, I was serious throughout the test. I didn't take it lightly in terms of I was focusing on every question. I did try to answer the questions properly. But I was like, man, this test is really not going to get me a good score. So I'm just taking it to practice. And I ended up with a 760, which, by the way, when it came on the screen in the end, and that time the score used to come on the screen. When it came on the screen, I was so surprised, pleasantly surprised, obviously, but so surprised that, in fact, the invigilator had to come and tell me, okay, now you can leave. And I told her, I'm waiting for my score. She's like, that's your score on the screen. Till that time, I thought it was just a sample template that they were showing. And that wasn't actually my score. I wasn't expecting a 760. I had a 570 the evening before. Obviously, then that also made me realize that maybe those Kaplan CD tests were a lot more difficult than the actual GMAT. So that was my mindset then, right? Nothing to lose. I didn't really care. And I'd already made up my mind that I'm not going to get a good score. Versus when I took this test, and in fact, it even happened more so in the practice tests. I'll talk more about this later. I had this mindset of, I have to get a score higher than 760. Think about that. Sure, I'm a GMAT coach and everything, but even for myself, I put quite a lot of pressure on myself. I have to get a score even higher than 760, which is already a pretty high score, right? But oh, Anish, you already have a 760. Now you need a higher score. So you can't afford to make a single mistake. That was the story I was telling myself. I believe that did play a part. So yeah, I don't know. These are my speculations, right? 760 to 760, maybe the skills haven't changed or improved, or maybe there were these other things also going on. I'll talk more about my mindset in this recent preparation. All right, so let me now get into What I did in these, all right, on 23rd December, I decided I want to take the test again, the classic version, since anyway, it was going to end on 31st of January 24. So I thought, might as well take it once before. 31st December, then I took my first practice test, in which I scored a 770. Quite pleased with the score, higher than the 760 I had already. So yeah, I mean, things looked well. And plus, also, I noticed that the kind of mistakes I had made were not things that, oh, I just didn't know, or they were really difficult for me. They seem like, to put simply, careless errors, silly mistakes. So that gave me some hope also, that maybe it's not that difficult to improve further from this point. Then I took a mock after a few days. I didn't study anything. I had the 760, 770 in the previous one, right? I'd already decided, oh, that's fine. Plus, I mean, life was going on as usual. This wasn't something which was a high priority. I didn't study at all. The next mock, I got a 740, right? The quant and the verbal scores, both of them dipped. At that time, obviously, I was quite disappointed. Not very disappointed because, in fact, back in 2019, when I'd got into GMAT prep full time, I'd taken a practice test at that time also, in which I'd got a 730. I still remember that figure, 730. And I remember that I felt, man, this is even lower than 760 that I had in the actual exam. I started questioning, am I even fit to be a GMAT coach and all that? So I had that figure in my mind. So when I saw the 740, I related it with the 730 and I thought, sure, okay, it could have happened. It happened, fine. It could have anyway happened, right? Sad, but not too surprised. In fact, luckily at that point, I started thinking myself, and also I had a conversation with my brother around that time as to why am I even taking the test? Remember, I had said earlier, for me, the main reason was I wanted to improve that figure, the 760 figure, so I could show it off everywhere, right? On LinkedIn, my email signature, everywhere. That was the main reason. But he asked me that, do you think even if you get that higher score, that will really add a lot in terms of how many students you are getting? Is that really a big marketing point? And I started thinking, no, none of those things. Right? It's not like I'm short on students right now. It's not like, oh, I'm desperate to get students. And anyway, I didn't think of it as marketing. Maybe it was more an ego issue or something that I just wanted that stamp. But no, not marketing. But that did lead me to think in a different direction. Why am I even taking the test? And plus, since I am a GMAT coach, can I, through my experience, maybe help out some students in the future also? So then I started looking at the test in a different light. Instead of thinking about how can I improve, how do I get the higher score, perhaps it was also a way of trying to convince myself to not take too much pressure, that anyway focus on what you can learn through this experience that maybe you can share with the students later. Right? So one way to kind of manage the whole situation, the pressure that I was perhaps in from within. Next mock, which I took one day before the exam, on the 20th, I eventually took the actual test. I got a 750. So again, 770, 740, 750, right? So from, oh, I have to score higher than 760. Now it became, oh man, let me score at least 760, right? I didn't want to end up with a score even lower than 760. So that was my mindset the day before the exam. Then I went and took the test. I ended up with the same score as my previous official one. So a few things about my experience in the mocks. Perhaps the starting point, like I said earlier also, I made silly mistakes in pretty much every exam. Even in the one in which I scored a 770, the practice exam, I had made careless errors in that exam also. What kind of careless errors? The most common was, for example, in data sufficiency, I had figured out that, oh, even the combination is not sufficient. The answer should be E. But somehow I went and marked C. And data sufficiency, sentence correction, I figured out, oh, this option is wrong, B is wrong, D has to be correct. But I ended up marking B. So there were multiple such instances where I was sure that in my mind I had figured out the correct answer, but I had clicked on the wrong answer. So very common, right? Now, again, mind you, we're not talking about a lot of mistakes here anyway, right? Even 740, 750 are not low scores. So perhaps, I mean, like in the 770 exam, I had 11 mistakes total. 5, I think, in quant and 6 in verbal, or maybe vice versa, but 11 mistakes total. So anyway, we're not talking about a huge number of mistakes. But yeah, I did find that there were quite a few instances in which I had just made some careless errors. Another example, there was a probability question which asked about what's the probability of taking out 2 red balls from a set of balls. I understood everything and I solved it, but the mistake I made, instead of calculating the probability of taking out 2 red balls, I calculated the probability of taking out 1 red ball. Lo and behold, that was also an answer, right? Had I gone on, I could have figured out how the 2 red balls things also, right? So, and I'm myself a big proponent of focusing on silly mistakes, not taking them lightly, trying to figure out a way to not make silly mistakes, right? So then that got me thinking even deeper as to why am I making these mistakes? What's really going on here? One thing that came out from my analysis when I analyzed the practice tests, one big thing that came out was that pretty much all the mistakes that were of this nature were careless errors I had made on questions or on questions based on topics with which I was not 100% comfortable. Now, this is something that I had seen with students before, and I told them also. But again, being honest, I hadn't experienced it myself. I hadn't noticed it for myself, and I had put myself on a pedestal that, oh, it happens with students, it won't happen with me. It kind of became a reality check. I've seen this happen with many students. So I want to iterate this point one more time. When we make careless errors, simplest of errors, right? It's not just about the error we make, but also about when we make such errors. And I have found with many of my students, and then myself also recently, that I was making these careless errors mainly when there was some form of discomfort with the question, some form of discomfort, which is not to say I didn't eventually understand things. I understood everything correctly and properly. But still, I didn't feel fully comfortable and fully confident with what was going on. And that was when I was really making such mistakes. Right? So it wasn't just about, oh man, I thought of C, but I marked E. No, there was something underlying. There was something else also going on there. So then not a direct actionable, but just this awareness that, oh, it's careless errors don't necessarily happen in isolation, but there's a potential underlying reason. Just that awareness made me think that, all right, I need to be more aware of being uncomfortable. Right? Forget about, or rather, let silly mistakes be for now. Even before that, I need to be aware that, oh yes, there is a level of discomfort. I am finding it difficult to exactly understand what the question is saying or how to solve it or any particular step. And therefore, potentially, I'll be more accepting of this situation that, man, I can make mistakes in this situation. So maybe let me, if time permits, obviously, maybe let me slow down even further, maybe double check things, maybe double check my calculations. Am I doing 5 plus 7, 35? and just making sure that I've got everything sorted. Again, not a clear-cut actionable, but still, I do believe that this awareness itself has a lot of value. So this was one big learning I had for myself through the practice tests. Silly mistakes don't happen in isolation. They didn't for me anyway. Now, I guessed on a few sentence correction questions in verbal. One, anyway, I'm kind of lazy, right? I ran a course called Overcome Procrastination. The reason I started that course, and by the way, a few of you have been past students of that program. One reason I started that program because I wanted to overcome procrastination for myself. So I thought, let's do it together. So anyway, coming back, so anyway, I'm lazy plus sentence correction was going to finish in the focus edition also, right? So I didn't have a lot of incentive to study for sentence correction. Although it was evident that I am guessing on a few sentence correction questions here and there, I didn't do anything for them. So then, essentially, between exams, it was more, the only thing I'd done between the mock exams was analyze the mock exams themselves. I didn't do any other practice. So as such, the 3 exams, I didn't even appear for the integrated reasoning and the AWA, right? All I did was those 3 exams. So roughly 6.5 to 7 hours of prep total. That's not true. 6.5 to 7 hours of doing the exams, and then maybe that much time or a bit more analyzing the questions. Then came the actual exam, the 20th of January. No surprises, first of all questions looked very similar in terms of the level of difficulty, the kind of things that were being tested. So no surprise as such, right? I had heard a few students say, oh, GMAT has been becoming more difficult. And I didn't notice anything like that. Also, no surprises, in fact, no surprises in terms of how I was behaving during the test. Now, I've experienced this before also. I saw it again this time, that if I was getting distracted during the practice tests for a moment here and there, I was getting distracted during the actual exam also for a moment here and there. Not for too long, but I did find that once in a while, my mind would not focus on the question on the screen and start thinking about something else. And then I had to bring it back. So as such, a very similar experience. Suddenly, I didn't become a better test taker on the day of the exam. Now, let me talk more about that mindset thing that I had mentioned earlier. One of the questions on the actual exam in quant, a geometry question, I spent over 6 minutes on that question. I don't remember exactly when it appeared, but it was somewhere around the 12th to maybe 15th question. So in the first half, I spent over 6 minutes on the question. And even after those 6 minutes, I still guessed. I was able to boil down things to 2 answer choices, but I couldn't figure out the answer between them, right? But the mindset I had, oh man, again, somewhere at the back of my mind, obviously one was somehow I had the confidence that I'll still be able to tackle the remaining questions in time properly, so I can afford to spend longer here. Don't know whether it was well-founded confidence or not, but I had that confidence. The other thing, again, I think that I had at the back of my mind was I can't afford to get a single question wrong because I want to try to increase my score from last time. I've already had a quant 50 in the past, so I wanted a quant 51 this time. So not a single mistake, right? And so that didn't allow me to, although eventually I did, but for 6 minutes, that thinking didn't allow me to move ahead. Now, to be fair, I did finish the quant section in time. I don't believe that, or rather, I wasn't forced to guess on any question. These are facts. I finished on time. I wasn't forced to guess on any question. But yes, overall, I had slightly less time for the remaining questions. Had I saved some time on this geometry question, then used it later, would that have benefited me? I don't know. I can't say. That's speculation then, right? So I'm not certain whether it cost me, but yeah. Anyway, one fact, that there was a question in quant which took me over 6 minutes, and I was very cognizant that I'm taking this long, yet I was very apprehensive of letting go. Now that led me to realize that perhaps this is something that many students also face when taking a test, right? It becomes really difficult to let go. Now, I don't mean this is an excuse, but I believe that for the situation for me and for the students is not the same. For most of them anyway. I'm a GMAT coach, right? And I've been in this field for a very long time. So my objective of taking the test was very specific. Initial objective was to try to get a higher score than 760. And I'm starting with that objective, then definitely for me, making a mistake or guessing on even a single question can be a serious issue, right? So that's where I was coming from. So for me, while also I understand that 6 minutes maybe was too long, right? So, but I decided in that moment to go ahead and spend that time with students who perhaps don't even have an objective to score higher than 760, to even then make this kind of a trade-off, right? I'm not going to guess on this question. I'm going to spend longer. Otherwise, my score will get screwed up. That's an issue. Even if your target is, let's say, 740, 770 I had in a practice test with 5 mistakes on quant, 5 or 6 again, right? So let's say to get a 740, you probably can afford even a higher number of mistakes. And sure, some mistakes you'll anyway end up making, probably, right? But maybe you can consciously take a call also to not make mistakes, but to guess. And hopefully the guess works out in your favor. But anyway, guess so that you can answer the remaining questions properly and you're not rushed for time in the end. So to kind of summarize this whole thing, unless your goal is perfection in a section, if you're running behind time or if you're taking too long on a question, guess. Right? If your goal is not perfection, don't thrive for perfection. It's okay to guess in many situations. All right. Now coming to the focus addition practice test that I took recently. Took it on the 8th of February, 3 days ago, got a 675. So just some experience that I had. My first reaction internally was I was disappointed, right? 760 GMAT coach, right? From 760 to 675. So I was disappointed looking at a 600 something score. When I then found out, 675 is a 96th percentile score, I was still happy. All right, not too bad, right? Then I found out that 675 is equivalent to 730 in the classic version. Then I became a bit more unsure again, because 730 I'd scored back in 2019 once, and all the recent mocks I'd scored higher than 730. More than anything else, it bashed my preconceived notion. Remember, I said earlier, in the classic version, in verbal, the only guesses I made. Now, that's not to say that the only questions I got incorrect, but the only guesses I made were on sentence correction questions. And plus, most of the questions that I got wrong were sentence correction questions in verbal. Sentence correction was going. The question that took me the longest on the actual exam was a geometry question. The questions I typically struggle the most with are geometry questions in quant. Quant is gone. Number of questions is smaller. So I had kind of already decided that I'm going to do better on focus addition than on the classic version, right? Based on these facts, sentence correction gone, geometry gone. Therefore, I will do better. So in that regard, I'm very happy that I've been brought back, right, from that high place I'd put myself at, I've been brought back to the ground, right? The reality is in front of me. The same thing happened with the 740 score in a practice exam also, right? That it helped ground me. Similarly, the 675 has made me realize it's not as simple as, oh, the difficult questions are gone, therefore your score will improve. So what went on in this classic, in this focus edition test? Few things that I've already mentioned on LinkedIn also. The quant section I found was easier. Probably the main reason was removal of geometry. I did find that I'm not very comfortable, or now I can perhaps use past tense. I didn't used to be very comfortable with geometry. Again, very comfortable perhaps is a comparative thing for me, but compared with other topics, other sections, I was less comfortable with geometry, definitely. So now that geometry was gone, I definitely found the quant section easier in terms of the difficulty of questions and also in terms of time. So in the classic test that I'd taken recently, I'd barely finished the quant section in time. This time, in the focus edition practice test, I finished the quant section about 12 minutes before the end of the section. So I had close to 12 minutes to review my questions after that. So definitely I found quant was more of a breeze this time. Verbal now. No sentence correction. I did find that the verbal section was more time consuming for me. Basically, it's the first time that I have not finished the section. In the previous classic version practice tests and the actual exam also, I've at least always finished the exam. This time, I think, I don't remember now whether I actually clicked on answers or not, or whether time ran out before I could click on answers for the last two questions. I don't remember. Either way, though, I did not answer the last two questions, and I had them both incorrect in the end. Having said that, apart from the fact that or rather, on the one hand, I was short on time. On the other hand, I did find that I was more confident about my answers because sentence correction was not there. Or rather, I was confident about a higher proportion of answers. And whatever questions I was doing, critical reasoning and reading comprehension, I felt good about them. I did have a few mistakes in the end, mind you, but I did feel good about them while I was doing them. That was my experience with the verbal section. Data insights, a new section. I had done integrated reasoning in the actual exam in which I had scored an 8, and that was a breeze for me. Not boasting or anything, but it was a breeze, right? I found anyway, I didn't care much about that section. It wouldn't have mattered in the score out of 800. So I wasn't too bothered by it. Plus, I didn't find any question too difficult for me. I was able to manage time properly also. I'd scored an 8 in IR. In data insights, overall, I think I was answering questions well. But yes, I did find it quite time consuming. In data insights, I was not able to finish. The last question was left out. I didn't get through the whole section. And even before that, on one set, I was rushed. Right? I think I had 3, maybe 4 or 5 questions left when already I had, I don't remember now, but maybe 5 questions and 4 minutes, something like that. So that moment also, I took a call on 1 or 2 questions that within 30, 45 seconds, I guessed on 2 questions. Then I did 1 or 2 properly, and then the last one I couldn't finish. But yes, overall, time was certainly an issue in data insights. Overall, at the end of this focus edition practice test, I felt even more exhausted than I used to at the end of classic version tests. Right? So each sections become shorter, and I took the test exactly the way I would take the actual test. So, for example, in the focus edition practice test, I took one break in between, which was right after quant, So verbal and data insights I did together in one go. Maybe not the best decision also. But yeah, now overall 3 sections, the added importance of those data insights questions, because now they're a part of this 805 score. Plus there are more such questions now. And now I'm speculating here, but I do believe that those things played a part. And also one more thing that played an important part, I wasn't getting any breaks in verbal. Sentence correction, kind of. I mean, I think used to give me a slight break. Sure, I found them difficult. I would get some of them wrong. I had to guess on a few. But overall, mentally, I think my mind could relax for a second, or relax a bit more for a second. Compared with now, critical reasoning, reading comprehension, 2-3 questions, again, critical reasoning, reading comprehension. I think that was a bit more exhausting for me. What I know for a fact is overall at the end of this focus edition test, I felt more exhausted than I used to at the end of classic version tests, right? And what I shared before were my, again, speculations as to why that might have happened. I'm not sure, but I do believe those things played a role. More integrated reasoning questions, added importance of those questions, and removal of sentence correction in verbal. So back-to-back CRRC, those things. Now, why am I talking about exhaustion? Because it's possible, although when I analyzed my focus edition test, I didn't see anything like that, but it's possible that exhaustion can lead to poorer comprehension, poorer understanding, and also maybe it can compromise my ability to solve questions also, to some extent anyway. So, a lot of things I liked, few things I didn't like, right? Few things I'm unsure of. Geometry gone, I'm very happy. See, to take an example, many times in geometry, it's a matter of, oh, draw a line from this point to this line. Then you get 2 halves, and then this is equal, whatever. Right? And often the first question in mind is, by how do you decide that you need to connect this point with that line and make this dotted line? Right? For me, often that was the starting point itself, which got confusing. Right? Sometimes I could figure that out, but sometimes it seemed completely arbitrary to me. Why join these 2 points? Why not join those 2 points? And so, yeah, I believe even in terms of teaching, perhaps because I was anyway not as good at geometry as other things, even in terms of teaching, definitely that would have shown with my students also. So very happy about that from all perspectives. Again, let's be clear. This is me talking, right? Maybe some of you are great at geometry and maybe you're sad that geometry is no more. So it's very subjective in that regard. But this is just me talking. Same thing with sentence correction. I'm pleased that sentence correction is no more. Although I don't think that in terms of my coaching, sentence correction really was that bad or lower than critical reasoning and reading comprehension. That's my personal belief. But yes, as far as I was answering questions is concerned, I'm sure that I guess, or I used to guess on more sentence correction questions than I did on any of the other type. So in that regard, I'm happy that they're gone. Like I mentioned earlier also, there are some kind of trade-offs here, right? So anyway, for example, one big thing I need to think about overall is how to manage time well. For me, time was an issue in both verbal and data insights. Quant, not at all, but verbal and data insights, at least in this one practice test, time was an issue. So I need to figure that out. And removal of sentence correction perhaps played a role in this also, right? Overall, the average time maybe hasn't gone up as much, and though not consciously and not as a conscious choice, but I think typically I would compensate for taking longer on, let's say, reading comprehension through sentence correction questions. I would end up doing that, right? So now I don't have that fallback. So now every question I have to try to manage within the time. Mind you, it wasn't by a lot, right? I think overall, I have to try to carve out 3 minutes more. I think I had 1 minute left for the last two questions, close to that. I should have ideally had 4 minutes left for the last two questions. So I need to try to carve out 3 minutes more. Data insights also. It took me longer to just answer the questions and sometimes even to reach the actual question, right? I spent quite some time just reading the information, whether it's multi-source or whatever the question type might be. Just to reach the question itself, I feel was taking me quite some time. In data insights, I was very close to just marking the last answer and clicking on next. But even that I was doing in a rushed manner. So again, ideally, I would like to try to carve out, let's say, roughly 2 minutes more in data insights. Quite unsure about how to look at data insights now becoming a part of the main score overall, right? Obviously, one aspect I'm happy about is that now it's no longer a confusion whether I need to study for data insights or not. With integrated reasoning and AWA, the essay and the IR section, it was often about either it was left, by most students, it was left till the very end, or it wasn't touched at all. I've even had students who've got good high scores out of 800, but low scores in IR and AWA. And then they become unsure, oh man, should I retake the test to try to improve my IR score? Or is it okay like this? Right? So at least all that confusion is gone. In terms of importance, now everything is equally important and they all contribute to the score out of 805. So that's definitely a good thing. So why have I put a question mark here? So one experience I've had with data insights questions, and I'm not talking about data sufficiency here. I'm talking about the other 4 question types, the two-part analysis, multi-source reasoning, graphs, and tables. One experience I had that I was going too much in depth of everything. So if I were reading a two-part analysis question, for example, right, or a multi-source reasoning, I would read it the way I would read a reading comprehension passage, each and every word, each and every line, properly understanding everything. And then in the end, I found a few times that the question was such a basic question that didn't really need me to be so clear about each and every aspect. Right? I'd seen this in my practice of these questions before also, and I saw such a thing in the actual practice exam also. Right? So that leads me to think that I need to get more clarity in terms of how to deal with these questions. Maybe I need to take a few more calls in terms of what should I focus on, what should I not focus on. Right? So that's what makes me unsure about how to look at data insights. Obviously, one side is that anyway, this is it now. Right? It's not a choice anymore. At least with the last couple of months, there's this confusion and whether to prepare for this exam or to prepare for that exam, whether to appear for this exam or to appear for that exam. So in that regard, I'm very happy that now at least that
நீ தான் சொல்றேன் 5 நிமிஷத்துல எங்க போலாம். இப்ப நீ எங்க இருக்க? சரி விகாஸ் வேற வர சொல்லுவேன். வரதுக்கு 8:30
I hope
அதுக்குள்ள ஒரு
unmute yourself. Chalo. Now CG. I find, and maybe this is just me personally, but the fewer decisions I have to make, the happier I am. So now that anyway, there's only one version, at least it's no longer a choice between classic and focus, right? Now this is it. So in that sense, sure, now the question becomes how to deal with these things and not whether we should deal with them or not, right? So it's not about, should I even look into data insights or not? No, it's about how to deal with data insights. So in that regard, I feel that actually it's a good thing that fewer decisions, therefore less things to worry about. two aspects more I want to discuss. Overall, yes, okay. One more thing I'm not sure about yet, how I feel about it. Data sufficiency questions are now purely word problems based. So that did mean actually for me in the practice exam that I took lesser time on average on data sufficiency questions. I think I was able to answer pretty much every question in roughly 1 minute, 1.5 minutes, the data sufficiency ones. I don't remember exactly. I think I had 8 DS questions and I got 1 incorrect and 7 correct. Right. So overall, for this exam, sure, I would have ideally liked to get that 8th question correct also. And it wasn't even something that was a difficult question for me, but just something in algebra that I overlooked. So that became a lesson for me. I'll talk about it later. But yeah, I mean, why I'm unsure is because I wasn't using my pen, or I didn't use my pen for any question in data sufficiency. I'm wondering that is that what led to the one mistake? And could it lead to more mistakes for me, not using pen and paper at all? Right? While using pen and paper, maybe I'm more focused and more clear about the steps I'm following. I'm not sure yet. Right? I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just not sure yet. Again, obviously, the other side, like I said earlier also, this is the way it is now. So the issue is not, oh, should we embrace it? Should we not embrace it? What I am saying is, I'm not sure what exactly it means for me. I'm not sure how exactly I'll deal with it. All right. Now, one more thing I want to spend some time on is that whole review and bookmark option that we have now. For the uninitiated, let me quickly set the stage. We now have a choice to change up to 3 answers. The way it works, at least what I saw in the what I understood from the practice test, you go through all the questions in a sequence. While going through a question, you have an option to bookmark a question. And then if at the end of the last question you have time left, you reach a review screen. On the review screen, you just see question numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, 21 question numbers, for example. And with that number, in case you bookmark the question, you'd see that bookmark symbol also. You don't see any text from the question itself. So I, for example, just by looking at the numbers, had no clue about which question was which. Maybe you have great memory, or maybe you figure out a way to deal with those things, but there was no text at all, not even the first 4 or 5 words or anything like that. So on that review screen, the only thing I saw were question numbers, and some of the questions which I had bookmarked had that bookmark there on the review screen also. So that's what the review screen is. We can, in the end, go back and review questions. We can review any question, all questions, but we can only change. But we can only change up to 3 answers. So we're not allowed to change as many answers as we want, up to 3. That's the upper limit. So first, I'll share my experience with review and bookmark. So in quant, starting point, like I said earlier also, I had finished the section and I had roughly 12 minutes left. Then I reached the review screen. I had bookmarked one question in which I felt slightly unsure. So the first thing I did was went back and checked that bookmarked question. That one turned out to be correct. Or rather, I didn't change my answer anyway, right? I've calculated it again and I still got the same answer. Then I didn't really know which questions to check. I didn't remember. Even, even if they had written the words, I'm not sure whether that would have helped. I drew a complete blank at that moment. I didn't have any questions in mind which I wanted to go back and review. Plus, I think if I remember correctly, one thing I found very cumbersome was I didn't have an option to just click on next. If I clicked on a review question on a number, went to that question screen, I didn't have an option to just click on next and go to the next question and so on. I had to come back to the review screen, again click on a question number, then go to that question. So then I kind of decided, okay, let me just go sequentially. So I started with the first question. One thing I noticed that I had pretty much forgotten what I'd done earlier. Somehow, I mean, I was using my notebook, and if at all I would have done any rough work, it would have been in a sequential fashion. So I could have gone back and checked my working, but I'm not even sure whether it was the right decision or not. And I'm sure during the exam, it wasn't a conscious decision, or rather, I didn't pay much attention to it, but I somehow decided I'm not even going to turn 2 pages back. That was the decision I took. Right? Later on, I thought more about it. Why did I decide that? Was it that I was thinking that, oh, anyway, my working will bias me and might end up, it might lead me to make the same mistakes again, or it'll be difficult to find my working or understand my working? I'm not sure what it was. And I'm not even sure whether I had actually thought about that during the exam. What I'd done in the end, though, was I didn't go back to my working from before. I was directly just solve the questions again. One thing I did experience was that questions seemed surprisingly new for me. I was looking at them again within whatever, 30, 40 minutes, right? Not a huge gap. But they seemed fairly new to me. Not that they weren't familiar at all, but basically I just solved roughly 10 questions again. Now, 9 out of those 10 were correct. One of them was wrong. I changed my answer. So this is all the review I could do in quant. As it turns out, in the end, I had a perfect score in quant, all 21 correct. So that one question review helped me find my mistake. Right? So I was able to fix my mistake. So very pleased there. At the same time, it was lucky because I was just going sequentially. I hadn't even bookmarked that question. For me, I didn't even think that I'm unsure. I'd made a mistake which I wasn't even aware was a mistake, or I wasn't even aware that this is a point of being unsure, right? For me, it was just a part of the steps I was following. I felt pretty confident in the first go. So it was very lucky that I found that error. So yeah, so that leads me to think I need to be more clear about how to deal with this whole review thing, bookmark. I was luckily, yeah, luckily, not lucky, but luckily, whatever that means. Now, another fact, I did not get penalized for that. So in the end, I had a 90 in quant. So then me going back, and by the way, it was the 6th or 7th question, me going back and changing an answer, in the end, right? And remember, it is an adaptive test. So I've seen some speculation like this. Oh, if you change an answer from the very beginning, then wouldn't the other questions actually should have been more difficult, less difficult, right? How does that impact? This is what happened with me. I went back and changed one answer, and my score was still 19 quant. Does that mean you can change up to 3 answers? Even the first 3, your score won't change? I don't know. All I know is what happened with me in this practice test. So overall, quant, I had, like I said, 12 minutes left. So I'm not sure yet. I haven't come up with a strategy. I have to think about it more. But I have to think about how I want to go about things in the next exam. Do I, as a starting point, just spend longer on each question to maybe even avoid mistakes in the first place, maybe revise my answer before I move on to the next one? Do I come up with a better review strategy, better bookmarking strategy, a combination of both these things? I haven't thought about these things yet, right? But that is one of the things that I want to figure out, because as it turns out, at least in this one quant test, I had a fair amount of time left. Will that be true in the next test also? I don't know. We'll see. Verbal data insights, anyway, I ran out of time. So I anyway could not even use the review and bookmark features. So now that's also something that I have to think about, right? I mean, I don't mind bookmarking questions anyway, even if I don't get to them in the end. So what? But yeah, one thing I am thinking is that maybe I can't afford to leave questions for later. I don't want to do that. I don't want to decide. Well, of course, if after, let's say, spending 3 minutes, I still can't figure out a question, I will guess and move on and bookmark it. But I don't think I want to use it as a strategy that, oh, no matter, anyway, I'm going to bookmark this question and come back to it later. Because maybe I run out of time and I can't come back to it. Like I said earlier, what did happen with me in quant was pretty much every question seemed almost brand new to me, almost brand new. Not exactly, but close to it when I looked at them a second time. So that perhaps did also mean that I was spending a significant amount of time just reading the question again, just understanding the question again, things which I had already done before, right? So not sure yet how to deal with this new review feature, this bookmarking feature. I fear, although it didn't happen with me this time, it really helped me in this recent exam. I fear also whether it's a double-edged sword. Like I said earlier, also, the fewer the decisions there are, the better I find things, the better I feel things are. So here, now this is an added decision, essentially. Do I spend my time on this question? Do I bookmark it, come back to it later, right? How do I deal with this question in this moment? That's a decision point, right? So I fear if there can be any consequences on the negative side also of this, right? But again, I'm not entirely sure how this will play out. I do know that in CAT, for example, we had the choice to come back to any question you wanted. On the GMAT, at least in the classic version, we had to go through each question sequentially. And once a question is done, you would never see it again. So out of those two extremes, definitely I like the GMAT side of things better. Because sure, you don't have a choice or you don't have an option to come back and change an answer, but at least you know that I'm seeing a question right now. The only thing I care about right now is this one question. And once I'm done with this question, I will never care about this question again. Right? So in that sense, it was done and dusted. Here, there's this looming thing about whether I should review it, right? How many answers to change? In fact, that's another variable. Changing 3 answers, will that come into play also? So again, something that perhaps we all need to figure out for ourselves. For now, my suggestion is, while it's an important test-taking aspect, anyway, let's not make it bigger than it is, right? There's so many other things, quant verbal data insights, those core things that anyway we need to do properly. So how exactly we'll deal with review and bookmark, while you should have a strategy before you go into the exam, in the grand scheme of things, there are definitely more important things also. All right. Last thing now, my plan to improve. My plan to improve in the next practice test that I take. Focus edition. So now this is something also which I discuss with my students. Why do we even take a practice test? One aspect, sure, is to check where you stand. Right? Like I also said, 770 made me happy, 740 made me disappointed, 675 made me disappointed. Right? It gives you a spot check of where you stand. But that's one thing. Now, that's a big difference between the actual exam and the practice exams. You getting disappointed on a low score in an actual exam makes complete sense. You getting disappointed on a low score in a practice exam also makes some sense, but not complete sense. Because the primary reason we are taking practice tests is to figure out what needs work. The primary reason is not, oh, let me check whether I'm ready or not. That's a secondary reason the way I see it. The primary reason is to figure out what needs work. Right? Okay, I've done quant, okay, I've done verbal, okay, I've done data insights. Now I take a test, I get a particular score. Now let me figure out what else needs work so that eventually, hopefully, I can reach the goal. Right? So that's the way I'm thinking of treating this score also, 675. Right? A few things I figured out in verbal, for example. There was one RC passage with 2 questions, which I got both of them wrong. So I had 4 mistakes in verbal overall. One was this RC passage, not very long, but both questions I got wrong. And then the last 2 questions I had to guess on, or I don't remember whether I finished them. 4 mistakes I'd made in verbal. But not just that one RC passage, which I actually got wrong. There was, I think, at least one other RC passage in which I had taken a significant amount of time. I think 3 questions I had taken close to 9 minutes, maybe even more. So that I feel is one definite thing I want to work on, practice more. And they did look fairly difficult to me. So I want to practice 750, 800 level RC passages to try and comprehend them, perhaps in a little less time than I took on average on the exam. One more thing I feel I need to work on, I've talked about this before also, mixed bag questions in verbal. Sentence correction to some extent. Now, I don't want you to take this out of proportion, but to some extent, I think acted as a break for me. In at least the recent focus edition exam, I did feel that I was not getting that respite in the entire verbal section. It was just back to back, back to back. I have to focus, I have to concentrate, I have to read, right? And heavy text after heavy text. So that's now something I would like to practice. Mixed bag, RC, CR, verbal questions. 2-part analysis questions in data insights. I noticed, I think I'd done this in 1 or maybe 2 questions. I don't remember now. Well, I'd done it in 2. I don't remember whether in both of them I got it wrong or not. As I was going through the options, there are 2 columns, right? You have to find an answer for each column. I was going through the statements, and I don't do this in verbal at all, but here I found a statement that I liked, for example, the 3rd one. Even before I checked the 4th and 5th, I marked the 3rd one and moved on. So at least 1 of 2 times that I did that, I had my answer wrong. And when I saw the other answers later on, I did realize why another one actually should be correct, which then in turn helped me understand the mistake I was making with the answer I had selected. Now, sure, one reason I was doing that was to try to save time. And if obviously I've said multiple times, I did run out of time in the end. But what I do believe now, that this is not the way to save time. I have to figure out some other way, which now ties into another thing I was saying earlier, that in data insights, I found I didn't need to read as thoroughly as I, for example, read a reading comprehension passage, because the questions more often than not were not really that deep, right? So perhaps more practice with data insights questions, just so that I become comfortable with perhaps a higher level of understanding and not going too much into depth. That's another thing I need to do. So that's where potentially I'll save time from. Right. So that's it. One question that I still have is it okay to guess? Till now, I've been very, very apprehensive of consciously guessing. Unless it's a situation in which I've already spent 3-4 minutes or a long time and still not getting the answer. Sure, I've guessed in such situations in the past. But I've never guessed within, let's say, the first 1 minute. Something, by the way, which I recommend to my students. Unless your goal is a perfect score, your goal is to maximize the overall score in the section and not to try to answer each and every question correctly. And in order to maximize your overall score, it might mean that if you come across a really difficult question somewhere in the middle, you guess on it so that you can spend longer on the other questions. You guess on it quickly. That's what I recommend to my students. I didn't do that in the focus edition test. So I haven't made up my mind yet. Before I take the next test, I think I would like to have a conscious decision about this before the test as to what strategy I want to apply in the test. So now all this is to say that I tried to figure out the reasons why I got the 675 and not a higher score. Let's be clear, I could be wrong about the reasons, right? These are what I believe the reasons are. I could be wrong about them. But, I mean, I can't do much else. What I will do, therefore, is I have come up with reasons. I will try to come up with ways to address those issues and then take the next test and check whether those issues actually got addressed or not, at least to some extent, right? If they did get addressed, wonderful. If new issues pop up, I'll work on them. If these ones aren't fixed, I'll look into that, right? So it's kind of an experimentation. I found issues. I'll work specifically on fixing those issues before I take the next test. Then take the next test, right? I am now treating this whole thing a bit more seriously, perhaps than well, at least I'm thinking so far anyway, that I'll take it a bit more seriously than I took the classic version tests. There anyway, I was like, oh man, who cares? Sentence correction gone, geometry gone. But this is staying. So perhaps it's worth it for me to invest my time to get better at these things. Obviously, one big reason I'd like to see a higher score also, but also to see what I can learn through these things. So I've come up with a plan. My intention is to work on these things, then take the next mock test. Doesn't mean that guaranteed I'll get a higher score next time, right? But then based on what score I get, what kind of mistakes I make, I will figure out what worked, what didn't work, and I try to figure out again what needs work at that point. With that, I'm done with stuff from my end. That's it from my end. Thank you all for patiently listening. Yeah, that's it. So I'm around in case you guys have any questions, any feedback, anything at all. Hope you guys had a good experience. Hope you guys learned something in this webinar. In case you would be interested in more such webinars in the future, for now, the main source of communication is LinkedIn, right? Anyway, I have your emails also now. If you're not interested, maybe you can let me know. Please don't send me an email, then I won't. Otherwise, whenever I'm conducting future webinars also, I'll share that with you guys. I'll stick around for questions for a bit. If you'd like to take off, once again, hope you had a good session, and I will hopefully see you again. Let's try to get questions into chat first. I see a few hand raises, and then that way I think we can be more efficient. If still needed, we can have a conversation in the end. Okay, I'm glad to hear that, Navisha. You're very welcome, Rahul. My pleasure. Welcome, Anirudh, Somadeep. I'm glad you found it that way, Kunal. How long does one ideally need to prepare for a 750 score, Lasya? No fixed answer for that, yaar. No fixed answer for that. I've talked about this many times. I don't know if you and I are connected on LinkedIn. If not, please send me a connection request. I talk about this a lot. It depends on how much distance you have to cover. So there's no formula to calculate how long you will need. Depends on where you are, where you want to reach. Can't answer your question. You're very welcome, Ashish. Again, CG, put your question in the chat. My pleasure, Ruchi. You're very welcome, Mukund. You're welcome, Isha's iPhone. Abhishek, how to figure out if I've spent 2 or 3 minutes on one particular question while solving it? Is it to keep looking at the watch, or some tutors recommend having a sense? I think you mentioned this question in the form also. Sense of what 2 or 3 minutes look like and ignoring seeing the clock. So, okay, this is what I recommend. That you have milestones. What I mean by milestones, for example, now, Remind me, what is it? 21 questions in 45 minutes, no? But quant, 21 questions, 45 minutes. Huh. Or 42 is it? No, 45. Each section is 45. So 21, 45, depending on how you do with speed usually. If you are decent with speed, then you could divide the section into 3 portions. I should be done with the first 7 questions. And when I start the 8th question, the countdown clock should read dot dash dash, whatever, right? Subtract 1/3 of the time. So that way you can track. So after 1/3, are you on track? If you are, continue that way. If you're running behind time, then you need to pull up your socks. That's the other thing then. How do you pull up your socks? One solution is I'll try to be slightly faster on every question. But that's dangerous. Anyway, typically you would have practiced doing questions in a particular time frame. And now you're thinking on the exam, I'll do all the remaining questions slightly faster than that average time. So I don't recommend you do that. I recommend that, let's say you're running behind time after the first third, you find a question here and there which looks difficult and you can guess on quickly, maybe within 30 seconds, 45 seconds, so that you can save time from that or those questions to do the remaining questions properly. How many you would need to guess on would depend on how much behind time you're running. If you feel it's a common thing for you, instead of 3 portions, maybe you can divide the section into quarters. Look at the time after every 5 minutes. But yeah, that's what I recommend, that you have a clear milestone kind of mapping done even before you go to the test for each section, and then use that. Did I answer your question, Abhishek? For students who prepared for Classic and now wanting to prepare for Focus, what would you suggest? Not sure about your question, Anirudh. What would I suggest? That you find out things that you are not good at and you work to improving them. Try to improve them. Yeah, maybe you can add more about your question. At this high level, I'm not sure what to suggest. RC, your recommendations to improve it. Again, see, very high level. I can't give you this is a magic pill for RC in at this moment, right? High level recommendation, focus on what the name itself says. Focus on reading comprehension. Focus on comprehending the passage. I have some videos on YouTube in which I've explained a couple of RC passages. You can go through those. Maybe those will help you understand how I recommend you try to understand, comprehend passages. But yeah, again, quite high level, yeah, Ashish. You're very welcome, Rahul. Just wanted to understand, does the quant section only contain, only PS? Data sufficiency is now in data insights. You had taken my classes for Classic. How should I go about preparing for data insights? Starting point, do a few data insights questions, Ruchi. See how they're going. If anyway everything is going swimmingly, wonderful. Right? If you feel that you're struggling with them, if you can improve yourself, try that. But if you still feel you need help, anyway, for example, in GMAT Intensive also, we've added data insights. That's one option. Other courses have also done the same thing. I haven't gone through data insights content of any other course, so I can't comment on that. But anyway, there's some free content also available. I think GMAT Ninja has some really good videos that are there on YouTube for data insights. But yeah, I mean, see how they're going. If you need to work on them, work on them. Don't treat them as a stepchild, right? The way many people used to treat, or still perhaps treat, reading comprehension. Probably not as much anymore. The way many people used to treat reading comprehension and verbal, focusing more on RC, CR and SC and less on RC. Don't do that with data insights. Did I answer your question, Ruchi? You're very welcome, Irfan. I had a question. How do I prepare for DI? I think I already addressed that, Irfan. If someone is starting with focus, which materials to begin with, and are 2 months sufficient? Kshitij, main suggestion, don't start with thinking that will 2 months be sufficient. They might end up being sufficient for you, but don't create that deadline at the very beginning for yourself. Right? Typically for people, they require more than 2 months. Where you stand, I don't know, but don't start with such a stringent timeline in mind. That's my suggestion. So if you're just starting, why even think about scheduling right now? Focus on starting now, right? What materials to begin with? See, I mean, I would recommend if you're just starting off and you have a stringent timeline, then use a structured course, right? Typically, the courses I recommend: target test prep for quant, GMAT for verbal, or uh, a good friend of mine, Chiranjeev, who's also a GMAT coach. Chiranjeev and I together offer a course called GMAT Intensive. Right? So you could look into these courses. But yes, I would recommend you go for a structured course. And because you are looking at doing things in a short span also, right? So you have to figure out whether you want to save money or time is more important to then decide what way forward. But yes, ideally, a structured course does help. If you can afford it, definitely worth it. Did I answer your question, Kshitij? CG, during analysis, you might have encountered a question of a topic which you might have covered, but weren't able to solve because of being uncomfortable. How to eliminate this? To get more comfortable, CG. Right? If I'm not comfortable with something, I'd like to, and I'll try to get more comfortable with it. Not sure what else to add there. Maybe you can ask a follow-up question. How do we deal with test day anxiety? I'm conceptually clear in verbal, but on test day, I blank out. So, but why do you blank out, Akshat? That becomes the question. Right? Where does that blank out even come from? Is it something that just started the night before the exam and maybe on the day of the exam, or it's something that maybe is going on at the back of your mind throughout? What I mean by that is, for example, how much importance are you giving to GMAT and this MBA? Are you looking at it as something which is an opportunity for you? Or are you looking at it as something that is preventing you from achieving your dreams and something you just have to finish so that you can continue and your life has come to a standstill because of this test, right? So I don't know what your outlook towards the test is. But yeah, I would urge you to think about it from a more holistic perspective and not just think about how to deal with the whole situation on the day of the exam. There we go. So Akshat has replied, I definitely treat it as a high stakes test. Maybe that's, I'm not sure, but maybe that's where the anxiety is coming from. Right? So one exercise, Akshat, I'd like you to do is just write an essay, and maybe others can try this also. I've asked my students to do this in the past. It's been helpful for many. What would happen if I don't get my desired score in my desired timeline? Starting point. What would happen if I don't get my desired score in my desired timeline? Next, what would happen if I don't get my desired score this year? Right? I'm assuming your timeline would be less stringent than December this year. But what if I don't get my desired score this year? Next, what will happen if I don't get an MBA admission this year? And just chalk out those paths on paper or type them out. But just chalk them out. Just visualize them. Right? Because many times, and I know this has been true for me also, that even before I think about how bad things can get, I just think, oh, because things will get bad, it's not a good outcome. But then when I go deeper, I sometimes found actually they won't really get that bad. Not the end of the world. So yeah, again, without having a proper conversation, it's difficult to tell you specifically what issues you might be facing, Akshat. But main suggestion, don't leave things till the last night. It's not a last mile problem, anxiety during the test. It's something that probably has been brewing for a very long time. So needs a holistic solution. Wishing both of us good luck for the final focus edition. Yes, thank you, Abhishek. You as well. A bit more interactive ones. Hi, yaar, I wanted to keep today's at 75 minutes. So I did go through it in one go. But theek hai, that's point well taken. You're very welcome, Ruchi. I'm glad you found it that way, Kshitij. Sure, Akshat, you're very welcome. How do I hunt those similar questions for practice? See, and it is somewhat theoretical right now, CG, but starting point is to figure out what exactly am I uncomfortable with, right? What is it I'm uncomfortable with? And then if it's a matter of developing comfort, then it's not necessarily about finding more questions which are similar. It could also be, for example, going back and reading the concept of that particular thing, or maybe searching online, finding more videos related to that. Again, depends on what the topic is, what exactly we're talking about. But yeah, and that's what I'm going to try to do myself also, to try to understand exactly what is it that I'm uncomfortable with. For example, and by the way, I forgot to mention this earlier, one of the mistakes I'd made in data sufficiency, or in fact, the only mistake I'd made in data sufficiency, it was an algebra question. The main question essentially boiled down to an equation. And I don't remember exactly, but the question was something like, what's the value of one of the two variables? What's the value of X, for example? It didn't actually ask what's the value of X, but essentially what's the value of one thing, which for me essentially meant a variable X. The main question had one equation. Statement one had again an equation in terms of the same two variables. Statement two again had an equation again in the terms of same two variables. So then I decided two equations, two variables, statement one is sufficient, two equations, two variables, statement two is sufficient. Because one equation is already there on top, and then we had a second one in each of the statements. As it turned out later, one of the statements had an equation which was actually identical to the equation given on top. Right? For example, the main equation was x plus 2y equals 4. The equation in that statement was 2x plus 4y equals 8. Something like that. So identical equation. And that's why one statement was sufficient, which had a different equation, but one wasn't. Right? So very specific example. Then my takeaway is also very specific. How to deal with linear equations in two variables, right? And remembering this very specific case. This is a specific example. Now, in one probability question, I made a mistake, like I said, that I had to find the probability of picking two balls, but I stopped at picking one ball. Right? So for now, at least, my takeaway is at a very high level for the whole probability section itself. And like I said earlier also, the starting point is, Anish, remember, when you come across something you are even slightly less comfortable with, you tend to make more silly mistakes. Right? So just kind of like, if the floor is wet, just that awareness and that conscious, Anish, you have to walk carefully, right? Watch your step. So that's the stage I'm at right now. Will it really translate into more comfort? I'm not sure yet, right? But the way to develop comfort in probability, then again, I don't know whether I'm going to actually spend the time doing that. I don't know. And this could be because I'm busy, I'm lazy, all those things. But the way then would be not just about practicing questions, but it could also be a matter of looking at some good videos on YouTube, not necessarily only related to GMAT, but probability in general also, potentially. Right? Again, I don't want to put in that much effort, but basically, the way I see to get more comfortable would be to dive deeper into probability, whether through books, through a course, through videos, but not even necessarily restricting myself to GMAT content. Tell me. Noted. Sure. You're very welcome, CG. All right. In case there are no other questions, let's call it a day then. Chalo. Take care then, people. All right. Bye.
Hello.
Yes.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes.
Sir, I had one more question. Like, as you mentioned your journey, like from 2006 till now. So I just wanted to know, like, you got a score of 570, okay, and then eventually something different happened when you gave the actual GMAT.
मेरा background छोड़ो, question पे आओ.
Yes. So, sir, while we are getting the low scores during the GMAT mocks.
What do you
So
mean
how
by
should
we? Who is this we?
I get a low score on GMAT, then how should I deal about it?
नहीं. Exact situation बताओ ना. What score have you got? Tell me.
Sir, I got 560
560. In what? Actual GMAT practice test? What was it?
practice test.
Practice test. Now what's your question?
Sir, how should I deal with this now? Because I am doing the analysis, but I am afraid to give my next mock. Like, what if I get the same score again?
Yeah. हाँ. तो 560 से पहले क्या क्या मेहनत की थी?
Sir, pehle I had gone through all the basics and I had
How?
done. I mean, I had read all the basics and then worked upon the
How?
problems.
You joined some course, you just looked for content online for free. What did you do exactly?
I had a prep material of CAT, so with that I did.
हाँ तो CAT prep material ना, तो GMAT specific prep material ideally लो यार. Because while there are a lot of similarities, there are differences also. And plus in your case, लग रहा है ऐसा कि that maybe that CAT material wasn't enough.
Understood. Yes.
तो उस stage को lightly मत लो ना.
Understood.
That's what I would start with. Right? तो अभी तो और दूसरी बात ये बताओ, between or rather since the last 560, what have you done?
Sir, before that, I mean, from preparation point of view, I did prepare from the CAT material, and this was the first mock I gave of GMAT.
When did you take this exam? 560 wala.
Sir, I mean mid of Jan.
Mid of Jan matlab roughly 15-20 days ago.
Correct.
By the way, what's your name yaar, CG?
Chinmay.
Chinmay. तो last 15-20 days में क्या किया है फिर?
Sir, so in this last 15 to 20 days, I have gone through the the questions which I have done wrong, and I've tried to search those questions within the prep material, and I've also seen the videos how to do that. So some questions I found how to solve, but some questions I'm still not confident whether I will be able to solve it again if it comes in exam.
So hold on. So let's say you got whatever X number of questions wrong. For some of those questions, you found solutions, videos, whatnot. You understood how to tackle those questions. Some questions out of these X, you haven't figured out how to do properly.
Correct. Yes.
Yet your question was to me was, how should I take the next mock test? I have the fear of taking a mock test. Why are you even thinking about the next mock test right now? The only preparation you've done is you've analyzed the questions. And even for those, you haven't found answers for all of them. और क्या किया है तुमने? If you recall this the couple of slides today I was talking about, I've taken a mock, I've figured out my issues, I will work on the issues, then take the next mock. तो तुम्हारा तो वो दिख नहीं रहा मुझे पूरा यार.
Yes, sir.
Right? So you need to figure out what, according to you, maybe you're wrong, but anyway, according to you, what the issues are. Then you work towards addressing those issues and then you think about the next mock, not before that.
Yes, understood, sir. Sir, yes, and I also agree with the point which you said. Like, if you are looking at probability, then you will see probability from, as a general and not specific to GMAT.
Hmm.
So yes, that was a key takeaway. I'll do it.
Okay, so you got a way forward?
Yes, yes. Thank you, sir.
Sure, you're welcome. Anyone else, anything? Chalo, let's wrap up then. All right, take care, guys. Bye.